I'm the director of research at the Dolphin Research Center in the Florida Keys, and bear with me while I figure out the technology here. Today I want to talk to you about a few different things about dolphins. First, we're going to talk about some of our research with dolphins, and in particular cognition, so how they think and learn. That's my area of specialty and is a lot of fun. Next, I want to cover conservation of wild dolphins and the role that research and marine mammal facilities like Dolphin Research Center play in conservation issues. And then third, potential ethical issues that could be involved in housing dolphins in marine mammal facilities and doing research with them. If you have any questions, go ahead and type them. I'm not sure if I'm going to answer them as I go along or if I'm going to answer them at the end, probably a few places in the middle. It's going to depend on time, so we'll just play that by ear. Okay, so let's start with cognition. Now, when we talk about cognition, we're talking about the mind, right? So how an animal thinks, learns, that sort of thing. But the problem, of course, is that you can't see the mind. So how do you study it? Well, you have to problem solve. And what you do is you set up a situation, an experience, a puzzle, something that you present to the animal that goes into their mind. And then you can see what comes out the other side, a behavior, a response, an answer. So you know what went in and you know what came out. And so from that, you can start to puzzle out what's going on the inside, cognition. Now, importantly, all minds are, of course, not the same. So you're going to get different answers depending on if you're talking about the mind of a dolphin versus a dog versus a guinea pig versus a bee versus a human. And it's that last one in particular that I want to take a minute on because we're really used to our own minds. We're really used to how our minds work, and so it's tempting. And a lot of people assume that animal minds are just like ours, or maybe a little bit simpler, kind of like ours, but simpler. But that's wrong. That's the wrong way to think about it. And here's why. What I'm showing you here is a very simplified evolutionary tree. So on the bottom is species that are alive today. And then as you go up, you're going back in time, ancestors and ancestors and ancestors and ancestors. And what I want you to see from here is that dolphins and humans last shared a common ancestor 90 to 95 million years ago. That's obviously a long time ago. And since that time, we've evolved in very different environments. So whereas the ancestors of humans evolved first in the jungles and then in the savannas, the ancestors of dolphins went back to the sea. And those two different evolutionary pathways led to some really profound differences between us. Some obvious, some maybe not so obvious. But let's talk about a few that are relevant here. First of all, of course, we have very different body plans, right? While humans have all these gangly moving pieces, dolphins are torpedo-shaped. That means we're interacting with the world differently. For example, we have hands to pick things up. They obviously don't. We also perceive the world really differently. So we have eyes on the front of our heads. Their eyes are on the side of their heads. This means the world literally looks different to us, even when we're looking at the same thing. We also have some different senses. So they have echolocation, a sense where they can sort of see with sound. We don't have that. We have smell, though, and they don't have that. So the point is we're interfacing with the world really differently. In addition, we've also evolved radically, well, maybe not radically different, but different neuroanatomies, so brains. So for example, the cortex, that's that outer layer where all the thinking and learning happens. In dolphins, their cortex is actually bigger than ours, area-wise, and with more folds. But it's also thinner, and it has different cell types and different arrangements of those. So in other words, the wiring is different. And if the wiring in a machine is different, the machine does different things. It's also arranged a little bit differently. So for example, the area in the back of our head, that's where visual information comes in, whereas auditory information comes in the side. And so we have to have brain space in the middle dedicated to having those two areas talk. In dolphins, it's a different story. In dolphins, you have the auditory and the visual areas right up next to each other with no need to have an additional brain space so that they can talk. In other words, our brains are arranged differently. So therefore, our minds think differently, both in terms of how information gets into it and how that information is processed once it's inside. Our minds are really different. So the trick is, how do you figure out what a dolphin mind is like? So let's talk about that. What I want to tell you about is just 3 of our cognition experiments. We're going to talk about numbers, then we're going to talk about imitation, and then we're going to talk about physical reasoning. And I'll explain those as we go along. Okay, so in this first study, numbers, we wanted to know whether or not dolphins can compare quantities. So for example, if I show them 2 different sets of objects, can they tell me which set has more or less objects? And in particular, we picked less. So the way that we asked them this question is we had 2 number boards right here. On these number boards, we had different numbers of dots arranged in different arrangements. And their job was to pick whichever board had fewer dots on it. We had the trainer who was working with the dolphin. You'll see that she's in this thing we call a blind. The trainer, importantly, doesn't know the right answer, not because she can't count, but because she can't see the boards. And the reason that we did that is because it's really important that the trainer can't accidentally give the dolphin cues, which they might do unconsciously by leaning towards the right one or glancing towards the right one or something like that. So she literally does not know what the right answer is. However, someone has to know what the right answer is. So we have an experimenter behind the blind who's looking through a periscope and knows the right answer and can see what the dolphin does. Now, how do you ask a dolphin a question, right? How do you get them to know this is what we want you to do? So what we did is we trained them on 3 specific number pairs, and we gave them the answers for those pairs. So for example, if we showed them 2 dots versus 6 dots, the answer was 2, and they learned that. Then 1 versus 3 dots, the answer was 1. 3 versus 7, the answer is 3. So the question now is, do they have a concept of less? We don't know from this because we gave them the answers, right? But what we had to do then is test something new. So what do they do the first time they see 4 versus 6 or 5 versus 7, for example? And let me show you what this looked like.
Yeah, of course, our dolphins really healthy, but also our training is a wild dolphin.
Signal for less, the dolphin is supposed to pick, it has less, and he does a good job, yay! I'll show you one more time. The dolphin is waiting, the words come down, the trainer says less, picks the right answer. I have someone telling me the video is not showing. Is anybody else, did anybody see the video? We do, okay. Okay, great, stop. So there it is. So for a number of you, you guys saw it. I hope whoever didn't see it can see it now. So actually, the dolphins were really pretty good at this. But remember, we can't assume that their minds are the same. We can't assume they're thinking about it the same way we are. So I want to show you one more clip. It's a little bit trickier. So in this one, it's a little bit of a trickier one, but you know, if I asked you guys, those of you who are in school, if I said, all right, I need you to pick which one is less, and your math grade is going to depend on it, you would have no problem. What you would do is you would count. You would say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the left, 6 on the right, therefore the answer is obviously 5, and we'd have no problem doing it. Even little kids could do that. So here's our dolphin. He thinks about it, but he doesn't know the answer. And this was actually very typical. We had real problems with consecutive numbers. So 4 versus 5, 5 versus 6, etc. So that means that he wasn't counting. So he could do some of it for sure, but he's doing it a little bit differently than we are and has trouble with consecutives. Okay, so that was less. The next one I want to show you is imitation. Now here's the thing about imitation. Humans are really good at imitation. We imitate all the time. We imitate to learn language. We imitate to learn just about anything. We imitate to fit in with our friends. We also imitate to make fun of our friends. We, imitate each other to make fun of each other. We imitate all the time. And because we're so good at imitating, it often comes as a shock to people to learn that imitation is not at all widespread in the animal kingdom. Right? Most animals don't imitate. Hardly any animals imitate. However, dolphins do. So Hold on really quick, sorry. I just had for the last someone, Melanie B, just asked for all the correct answers on the left. No, we counterbalance. This is for the less study. We counterbalance so that half the time the answers were on the left, half the time the answers were on the right. It just so happened that in the video clips that I picked, the correct answers were on the left. Good question. All right, so back to imitation. Dolphins are really good at imitating. We know from previous research that they can imitate sounds, they can imitate behaviors. But so what we wanted to do is take that a little bit further and ask, can they imitate blindfolded? In other words, can they figure out how to imitate a behavior that they can't even see? Well, how do you ask them that question? We started with an imitation game they already knew. It's called Do As I Do. It's a very simple game if you know how to imitate. What you have is you have two dolphins. One dolphin is the model dolphin. His job is to do whatever behaviors his trainer asks him to do. Then you have the imitating dolphin, and his job is to copy those behaviors. But we changed the game a little bit in that we blindfolded the imitating dolphin. Now, how do you blindfold a dolphin? You use these soft latex eye cups. They're basically suction cups that go right over the dolphin's eyes. Now, you should know that the dolphin, if he blinks really hard, he can blink these off, no problem. Tanner, however, this dolphin right here, would indulge us, and he would let us put those on him, and he would play the game with us. So here's what that looked like on blindfolded imitation. He has one eye cup on. She gives him the signal for imitate, which is that karate chop thing. At this point, he can't see. The other dolphin gets a signal to bob up and down. And Tanner bobs up and down as well. He had no problem with this. Let's see another one. So again, he has one eye cup on, the signal to imitate, other eye cup goes on. This time he gets a signal for shark, which means swim like a shark, where you move your tail side to side instead of up and down like a dolphin normally swims. And Tanner was great at that too. Now, sometimes we had a person in the water, and I want you to watch what Tanner does. Okay, he can do this too, and he was fabulous at this. He was a rock star. So the dolphins not only can imitate, but they can problem solve while they imitate. They figured out with no problem how to imitate blindfolded, and they were flexible about how they did it. So sometimes they would do it by recognizing the sound of the behavior. For example, if I asked you guys all to close your eyes and I said, hey, imitate this, you could do it because you can recognize the sound of the behavior. But sometimes when the sound was different, so for example, when we had a person in the water, they're going to sound different than a dolphin sounds doing those same behaviors. What Tanner would do sometimes is he would echolocate, and that was the behavior I was trying to point out to you. He turns to the person and he buzzes him, so he echolocates on him so that he can sort of see that behavior with sound. So he was able to use a variety of strategies in order to imitate a behavior. They were great at this. Okay, back to slides. And the last study I want to tell you about with cognition is physical reasoning. Now, the question here is, can a dolphin keep track of and reason about an object even when it goes out of sight? Now, what do I mean by that? This is something that we do all the time. For example, let me see if I can do my little visual aids here. Let's suppose I have a ball and I put it in a cup, right? You guys know where the ball went, right, without even thinking about it. Now, here's a trick. What if I move the cup? Presumably, you still know where the ball is, right? It's a no-brainer for you. You didn't actually see the ball move from here to here, but it was in the cup moved, you know that the ball moved as well. And so that's the question, is do dolphins also reason about physical objects in that way? And here's how we asked. First, in training, the game we set up was find the alligator. Why an alligator? Well, the first dolphin that we tested this on, that was his favorite toy. We could have used any object at all. That didn't really matter. But we used an alligator. And so his job in training was no matter where we put the alligator, to touch the alligator. And if it was on a bucket, he was supposed to touch the bucket that it was on. Now, in training, the alligator was always visible. But then in testing, we're going to hide it and see if he can still figure out where it is. Looks like, not that, looks like this. So 3 buckets. The alligator goes into one of the buckets. And let me explain what you're seeing here. Remember how in the less study, it was very important that the trainer didn't know the correct answer, so they can't accidentally be giving cues. Same thing here. So it was really important that the person who is asking the question doesn't know the answer. So we had one person hide the alligator, and then the other person would come and ask. So she's going to ask where that alligator is. Where is it? And he picks a bucket. And it's the correct one. Yay! All right, now let's make it just a little bit harder and do the one like where I moved the cup. No brainer for you guys. Now we're going to move the bucket. Whoops, wrong one. Looks like this. So again, same start. She hides the alligator in one of the buckets, moves that bucket. He's watching that bucket move, puts the lids on so the other trainer doesn't know where it is. The other trainer comes up. Where's the alligator? And he picks a bucket, but he picks the wrong bucket. This really surprised us. And again, this was typical that these dolphins didn't know where the alligator was. Right? The dolphins didn't know something that was really obvious to us, not obvious to them. Okay. So moving on. So we talked about 3 different cognition studies with 3 really different results. In the first one, with numbers, they were able to understand the concept of less, and they did pretty well, but their minds were working a little bit different than ours. They specifically weren't counting, and so they had difficulty with consecutive numbers. With imitation and blindfolded imitation, they're rock stars. They were really good at that. Not only can they imitate, but they can imitate in a problem-solving kind of way when we change the rules of the game on them. With physical reasoning, they were really not very good at that. And like I said, that was really surprising to us. Something that's a no-brainer to us was really, really difficult for them. Okay, so let me go back for a second. Of course, this isn't a talk that's just about the dolphin mind. So the next thing I want to talk about is, well, what is, blindfolding dolphins and showing them math problems? What does any of that have to do with conservation? So let's talk about conservation. And I want to talk about the big threats to wild dolphins. And of course, there are a number of them. First of all, in some parts of the world, dolphins are still hunted and killed. Second, less obvious to people is that they also, a threat to them is harassing. And by harassing, what I mean is approaching a wild dolphin close enough that you're impacting their behavior. Now, in the US, of course, this is illegal. But whether or not it's illegal, it's very dangerous for the dolphins. And the reason is it interferes with their foraging, with their breeding, with their parenting skills, people getting between moms and babies. And sometimes people will even feed the dolphins. And they think they're doing a good thing. They think they're helping the dolphins out, but they're not. What they're really doing is they're teaching dolphins to approach boats. And when dolphins approach boats, they get hit by boats. Right? So please, please, please don't feed wild dolphins. It's really not good for them. What else? We've also got, of course, environmental catastrophes like oil spills. So a number of years ago, we had the Deepwater Horizon oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, which led to what we call an unusual mortality event. That means that a lot of dolphins in that area died. You also have, of course, marine debris. So this is trash that makes its way to the ocean, and then that trash can get the animals can get entangled in the trash, or they can ingest the trash, and it's not food and it's not good for them, and it can harm and kill them. And then, of course, there's noise pollution. These are loud sounds that we introduce into the dolphin's environment. Dolphins are very acoustic animals. They're very dependent on sound. So putting sound into their environment can get in the way of their hunting and their foraging, and it can even damage their ears. Now, of course, the underlying thing to all of this, the underlying thread, is people. People by far are the biggest threat to wild dolphins. And because of that, it's important that we look for ways for people to be the solution as well. And so, and we need to use every strategy that we possibly can. So what I want to talk about now is the conservation role that marine mammal facilities play in dealing with these conservation issues. And there are two roles. One, they provide, and I'm going to talk more about them, but one, they provide research and expertise with these animals that's impossible to get in the wild. And two, they provide a really cool mechanism, a forum, for connecting the public to these issues. And let me explain what I mean. So first, research and expertise that's impossible to achieve in the wild. So before we had dolphins in human care, we didn't know the basics about them. We didn't know how these animals worked. And so let me give you just a few different examples. So their perception, we talked about the fact that they have echolocation. In order to demonstrate and to show that they had echolocation, scientists had to have them up close and personal. We had to be able to do the studies to show, for example, that in the absence of sight, when you temporarily blindfold them, like with those suction cups, they can still navigate, they can still find food, etc. So that's something that is obvious to us now about dolphins, but that we didn't know until we had them up close and personal. Signature whistles. Signature whistles are a really cool feature of dolphin communication well, I'll explain. What you're looking at here is a spectrogram. A spectrogram is sort of like a graph of sound. So you have frequency on the y-axis, how high or how low a sound is, and then you have time on the x-axis. So you read it from left to right. And I'm going to try to play this for you so you can hear it. This is a dolphin whistle. Sounds like this. So if that came through, I'm going to play it again in a minute. I don't know if you heard it, but what you heard is it went up and down and up and down. Let me try it one more time. Sounds like this. Wait. Sounds like this. All right. So if you stick a hydrophone, which is an underwater microphone, in with a group of dolphins, you'll actually hear a bunch of different whistles. Oh, there it is. You'll hear a bunch of different whistles. It is not the case, however, that all of the dolphins in that group are making all of these whistles. It's not like shared words in a language like we have. Instead, in the 1960s, once we had them in marine mammal facilities, scientists discovered that if one dolphin temporarily separates from its group, it will tend to make one whistle over and over and over. If a different dolphin separates from its group, it will tend to make a different whistle over and over and over. These whistles are what we call signature whistles. They're individual whistles that act kind of like names in that each dolphin has one, and it uses it to announce itself and to keep in contact with other members of its group. Now I said it's kind of like names. It's not exactly like names because, for example, next time you go out of a room, try this. Try just saying your own name loudly over and over and over. That would be really weird. That's not something that humans typically do. However, it's exactly how dolphins use their signature whistles. Remember, we're not assuming their minds are like ours. In fact, there are differences as well. Okay. Cognition. We've already talked a bunch about cognition, and so I'm not going to go into specifics here, other than to point out that in order to study a lot about how dolphins think and learn, you have to have them up close and personal. You have to be able to present them with experimental situations, puzzles, games, where you can have all the scientific controls and repetition that you can't get in a wild situation. Same thing with physiology, right? With physiology, when you have a dolphin close, you have access to information that you wouldn't have otherwise. So, for example, what you're looking at the top here is a study happening in Dolphin Quest, Oahu, looking at lung function. And what they do is they ask the dolphin to breathe into that device in various situations. So maybe at rest, or maybe right before a dive, or maybe after a dive. And from that, they can measure things like how quickly the air is moving in and out of the lungs, and the chemical composition of that breath in those different situations, right? Information that you could never get from a wild animal. Same thing with pregnancy and birth. So for example, before we had dolphins in human care, we didn't even know the basics like, hey, how long is a dolphin pregnant, right? And what's birth look like? What you're looking at in that bottom picture is one of our dolphins giving birth, right? And you see the tail coming out right there. And not only were we able to see that, but we were able to observe that mom during pregnancy, and we were able to, with ultrasound, we were even able to watch the growth of the baby. Again, something that you just couldn't get in the wild. Research in marine mammal facilities have also given us ways to assess the health of these animals, right? Techniques for assessing the health. So I was just talking about ultrasound, and this is what that looks like. So that white machine is a portable ultrasound machine. And so what you do is you ask the dolphin to lay out, to just rest in front of the dock, and then you can use the ultrasound wand and you can put it on her abdomen and you can see what's happening inside. We also now know what early symptoms of diseases look like. We also know what the blood work of what looks like of a sick dolphin versus a healthy dolphin. We also know how to assess the hearing, for example, of a dolphin, even when they're not trained. And importantly, the techniques and the information that we have from these dolphins are now used to assess stranded animals as well. Okay, so upshot of this, having dolphins in human care allows us research and expertise with them that you can't get in the wild. In fact, as it turns out, the vast majority of what we know about these animals' physiology, healthcare, perception, and cognition have all come from studies in human care. And importantly, that information is now used by scientists to help interpret the behavior they see in the wild and forms the basis of conservation practices. Just like any system at all, in order to design an intervention or a solution for a system, you have to understand how the system works. But I want to be really clear, I am not claiming in any way, shape, or form that research in a marine mammal facility is better than or can replace research in the wild. In fact, to understand these animals, of course, we need both. There are some questions that can only be answered in the wild. And there are other questions that can only be answered when you have them up close and personal. And just like research in any field, these two situations work together and inform each other to give us a better understanding. And like I said, that's actually not specific just to dolphin studies. That's just how science works in general. Okay. Second issue, and just as important in my opinion, or second role that marine mammal facilities play, is they provide a forum for the public to directly experience dolphins, to learn about dolphins and the challenges that they face in the wild, and to make the emotional connections that are necessary to inspire conservation mindedness. Now that last point is really important because any sort of conservation strategy that you're going to implement in order to work is going to boil down to the millions upon millions of decisions of everyday men, women, and children. So how do you impact that? Well, we know that if you bring people into a facility like ours and you give them up close and personal experiences with these animals, they start to form a connection and they start to care. And it's that moment of connection, it's that moment of caring, that's a start of conservation mindedness. You know, it's not enough to just give people information. Information is important, but they have to care enough to actually go out and do something with that information. And importantly, I'm not just talking about people who already care about conservation, right? If someone already cares about conservation and they come into our facility looking for conservation information that's specific to dolphins, they can find that for sure. But we also have an opportunity to reach people who aren't looking for that information, who don't initially care about conservation, but they make a connection with a dolphin, and that connection leads to caring, and caring leads to conservation. And there are studies that have shown that when you give people experiences with animals in zoos and aquariums, that experience positively impacts their conservation-related behavior, knowledge, and attitudes. Okay? All right, so big picture, humans are of course the problem. Marine mammal facilities play two critical roles in addressing that problem. Of course, From an ethical perspective, though, any benefits to conservation, to research, to education, no matter how great those benefits are, you have to carefully weigh them against any potential costs that might come to these animals from living in these facilities. So we should talk about that, right? Is it the case that life in a marine mammal facility is detrimental to them? What do the data actually show? So what I want to do is I want to start by giving you guys a snapshot of where I work so that you have a sense of where I'm coming from. And then we'll go from there. So I work at a nonprofit dolphin facility in the Florida Keys called the Dolphin Research Center. It's pictured here. At DRC, Dolphin Research Center, DRC, we have 27 dolphins that live at DRC right now, ranging in age from almost 2, their birthdays are in 2 weeks, almost 2 to about 56, 27 dolphins. 2 of those dolphins were collected from the wild decades ago when that was still happening. 22 of those dolphins were born at DRC, or actually one of those 22 was born at another facility and transferred to DRC. And 3 of those dolphins were rescued from really bad situations in the wild when they were babies. Specifically, Jax was the victim of a shark attack that apparently left his mother dead as well. Louis was the victim of that Deepwater Horizon oil spill that we talked about a little while ago, and when he stranded as an infant, he was given a 5% chance of living. He was in really bad shape. He, by the way, is doing great now. And then there was Summer, who's actually a different species. She's a spotted dolphin, a stenella. She also washed up on a beach when she was young. She was in critical condition when she was found, and she, again, with no mother and too young to survive in the wild on her own. So all of them came to DRC, where they now have a forever home. Now, at Dolphin Research Center, we do a variety of different types of training sessions. So we've already talked about research. We also do medical and husbandry type sessions. We do sessions that focus more on physical, high energy type behaviors, and we do interactive public programs. And no matter what kind of session we're doing, we're talking about it. So we have narrators that are explaining to the public, here's what's happening, here's what's going on, and or we have trainers and other staff members who are talking to people and answering questions about what they're seeing. Okay, so that's DRC. I want to also briefly touch on what life is like in marine mammal facilities in general. The first thing you should know is that in the United States, the vast majority of dolphins who live in a marine mammal facility were born in a marine mammal facility or were rescued. There have been no wild collections in the U.S. since 1989. They live in social groups, they have a lot of physical and mental stimulation, and they have great medical care, which all sounds great. But if it's so great, then what about these criticisms that you sometimes hear about what life is like for these dolphins in these facilities? Let's talk about this. The first one I want to talk about is longevity, lifespan. So the question here is it true or is it the case that dolphins in marine mammal facilities have a higher mortality rate than dolphins in the wild? Well, let's look. Now, when I say mortality rate, what I mean is the percent of population, a given population, that dies in a particular year. So a high mortality rate is bad. That means more of them are dying. A low mortality rate is good. That means less of them are dying. So let's start with the wild data. What you see here are the mortality rate of the 3 wild populations for which we have that data. Okay, and the first thing I want you to notice is that the wild is not one thing, right? So the wild, there are some populations that are doing really well, that have a low mortality rate. There are other populations where they're not doing nearly as well. But for purposes of today, I want to focus just on the best case scenario. Okay? And that's for 2 reasons. One, this particular population, this is a group in Sarasota who have been studied for decades, and we know that the data is absolutely solid. And second is, of course, we want to set the bar really high, right? When we're making comparisons, we want to compare with what's the best case scenario out there. And so that's what I want to do now is look at, all right, well what does mortality data look like in a marine mammal facility? And specifically, well, here it is. What you're looking at here is data from something called the Marine Mammal Inventory Report. This is a government database that tracks the dolphins in marine mammal facilities in the United States. And what you see is that 40 or 50 years ago, in the 1970s, that mortality rate in marine mammal facilities was not as good as the best case scenario in the wild. Now back then, a lot of animals, probably almost all the animals then, were collected from the wild, which is presumably a really stressful process. And it was happening at a time when we were first learning about how to take care of them. However, since that time, you can see that mortality rate has gotten better and better. And in fact, for the past couple of decades, mortality rate in marine mammal facilities in the U.S. is actually better than even the best case in the wild. Okay, so that's one. Next potential criticism is sometimes you hear, well, you know what, you guys force them to work all day. You should really retire them. You shouldn't force them to work. Okay, so let's unpack that. What actually happens in dolphin training sessions and shows? First of all, yes, it is true that dolphins in basically all facilities, dolphins do a number of sessions with a trainer throughout the day. That's true. However, while some people want to characterize that as work, quotes, with all of the negative connotations that apparently go along with that, actually from an animal caretaking perspective, we know that positive reinforcement training sessions, in other words, the kind of training that's done with dolphins, actually adds to an animal's well-being. It provides physical stimulation, mental stimulation, and social stimulation, and a number of studies have shown that these types of training sessions are positive for the animal's welfare, which of course sounds good unless you think that somehow they're being forced to participate in them, but they're not. Animals choose whether or not to participate in any session and any behavior. They can and do occasionally decide to refuse to do a particular behavior or swim away. And when that happens, nothing bad happens. These animals get all of their required food regardless of what they choose to participate in or not participate in a given day. It is not the case, as you hear sometimes, that, hey, if they don't perform, they don't eat. That's not true, right? The trick with training is it's not a matter of do you feed them or do you not feed them. It's a matter of exactly when, moment to moment, you decide to reinforce them. Those animals get all their food all the time, regardless. Okay, but let's suppose we take away these loaded terms, right? And so instead of saying, are they forced to work, we'll take away forced, we'll take away work. There's still a legitimate question here. And the legitimate question here is, how much are we asking them to do things? How much are we asking them to pay attention? And that's a question that's answerable. So at DRC, we're very focused on data, so we decided to test this. It's a very simple study. What we do is on a given dolphins data collection day, anytime a trainer goes down on the dock to do a session, we time it. And we do that for all of our dolphins over multiple days. And what we found is that the average time we were asking them to pay attention to us in a day was an hour and a half. There's an hour and a half out of their day broken up over time where we're asking them to pay attention and to do things. Okay. Last criticism that you sometimes hear is, sometimes you hear people say, well, you know, dolphins are just too smart. They're too intelligent to do well in zoos and aquariums and marine mammal facilities. So obviously, this is something that is near and dear to my heart, given my area of research. So let's talk about that. Well, what is the deal with that? Well, first of all, as a scientist, I need to correct this mistaken impression that intelligence is a single thing that an animal either has more of or less of. You'll notice at the beginning of this discussion when we were talking about dolphins' minds, you never heard me say the word intelligence. Instead, I used the word cognition. And the reason is this question of how intelligent dolphins are, or any animal, how intelligent an animal is actually impossible to answer. And the reason is animals have evolved, like we showed, animals evolved in different situations, and their minds evolved to solve different problems. There is no single measure of situations, and their minds evolved to solve different problems. There is no single measure of intelligence that makes any sense at all. So, to address this question scientifically, we have to tweak it a little bit. So instead of asking how intelligent are they, we can ask how are they intelligent. What that does is it allows us to look at specific skills and capacities that can be compared across animals. So things like number concept, memory, imitation, navigation, things like that. And when we do that, like we showed earlier, we see that there are some areas in which dolphins' cognitive processes are really relatively sophisticated. And there are other areas where their cognitive processes are not nearly as sophisticated as you might think. Okay? However, having said all that, it is also true that across a variety of areas, dolphin cognitive processes seem to be relatively sophisticated compared to other non-human animals. But there is no evidence that this means that they would somehow fare more poorly in a zoological setting, as long as you take care of their psychological needs. So of course you need to do that. You need to take care of their psychological needs just as much as their physical needs, and we do. So let me tell you a little bit about how. First of all, there's training sessions. We talked about our cognitive research. Now for us, it's research. For them, it's thinking, it's puzzles, it's trying to figure things out. But even if they're not doing cognitive research, their other training sessions are asking them to learn. They're asking them to cooperate. They're asking them to have new experiences and try new things. This is psychological stimulation just as much as it's physical stimulation. In between training sessions, aside from hanging out with their buddies, which, by the way, is super important. Dolphins are social animals, and they need that social stimulation. They need that social boost. But in addition to that, we do what's called environmental enrichment. Now, environmental enrichment simply means introducing new things to their environment to give them new experiences. So it may be toys, maybe a new toy to play with. It may be a new situation that you're dealing with, or in that bottom picture, what we have something we call our Dolphin Entertainment System, or DESI. It's not there all the time, but we put it in there sometimes. And what it is it's a machine that has two underwater paddles. And depending on what order those paddles are pushed in, the machine does different things. So sometimes it may drop out pieces of ice. Sometimes it will blow bubbles. And sometimes that little alligator on top will shoot water. Right? And so depending on how they're interacting with it, it will interact with them differently. So the dolphins have a good time playing with that and exploring and trying different things. Okay. And then third, within our training sessions, we do a number of thinking games or concept behaviors. These are behaviors where we're asking them to remember, to think, to create. And I want to show you what those look like. Let's see, not that one. Okay, so in this first one, repeat. What you're going to see is she's going to ask the dolphin for a behavior, and then she's going to use a different signal to ask them to repeat whatever they had done in the first place. So she just asked him to dive, and he does. And then this time, notice she's going to use a different signal. She just asked him to repeat it, and his job is to remember what it is I just did, and to do that. And importantly, he doesn't know he's going to get the repeat signal, so he has to be remembering that all the time. Combos. Combos are, let's take several different behaviors that you know and figure out how to put them together into a new behavior all at once. So, in this case, she's asked to talk, to flip her flippers, and to dive all at the same time. Which she does. So this is a new behavior where it didn't have to be taught all at once. And this is thinking for them. Okay, how do I do all of those things at the same time? And you can put those together. You can put combo, and then repeat. So in this case, she's asking you to talk, to touch their rostrums or their snouts together, and to dive. And of course, this also shows dolphin cooperation because they have to do it together or not at all. And they do great. And we're just going to ask them to repeat. And there's another little added bonus here in that they have a calf, and he wants to go too. So the first time he goes the other way, but then he figures it out and he wants to hang out with mom. So he gets to play the game too, even though he's not specifically asked. Okay. Fourth concept, behavior, innovate. The only rule here is the dolphin can do whatever it wants as long as it's different each time. So the first time she flips her tail up, she's going to get the same signal again, and she needs to remember what she did and do something different. Okay? Now she needs to remember those two things and do yet another different thing. And this can go on and on and on. Okay, finally, match to sample. I told you that our research for them is thinking things. And sometimes we do things that are research-like, but we do them just for thinking. So for example, match to sample is research that other people have done, other people have published. We have no plans to publish this. This is just a game that we do. And the way that this game works is there are three objects. The one in the middle is the sample, and then they're supposed to figure out, well, what's the other object they're supposed to
whatever published articles that we have out there, where you may be able to find them, and what they're about, basically. Good job! As you see there.
And then same, this is similar to match to sample, except it finds something that's the same shape anywhere in the lagoon. So she shows him a hula hoop. Well, there is no other hula hoop in the lagoon. So what he does is he comes up with a dive ring, because it's the same shape. And by the way, that little dive behavior that he did, that wasn't actually part of the behavior. He just really likes this particular game, and so he gets excited. Okay, so let's finish up here, and then I'll go back. And I know there have been a bunch of questions going on. Like I said, I'm going to take those at the end rather than trying to integrate them. All right, so the upshot. We've talked about a lot of different things, but I want to make sure I leave you with four. If you learn nothing else, four things. One, humans are the biggest threat to wild dolphins, and because of that, we need to do everything that we can. We need to use every strategy that we can to fight that. Marine mammal facilities play two key roles in addressing conservation issues. One, they provide the opportunity for research that we can't get in the wild. And two, they provide a forum for public education and connection, which leads to conservation mindedness. And actually, marine mammal facilities play a third role as well, which is that they are key in rescuing and providing homes for those animals who are caught in our environmental messes that we create, like Lily here. Third, dolphins thrive in accredited marine mammal facilities. And I'm using the word accredited here on purpose. And the reason I'm doing that is to highlight those facilities that have a track record of high welfare standards, right? I am not claiming that dolphins will do well in any situation. Of course they won't. Nobody does. Humans don't, dogs don't, horses don't. You have to pay attention to their needs. You have to pay attention to their physical needs, their social needs, their psychological needs. But when you do that, like in an accredited marine mammal facility, dolphins do great. Dolphins are, in fact, one of the animals that is the most successful in a zoological setting. Right? They do fantastic. Fourth, although I've talked mainly about dolphins in marine mammal facilities, because that's where I work, I want to leave you with a thought that we try to impart to all of our guests, which is that human choices impact every animal on this planet. There is not an animal that is not influenced by our actions, right? We're the ones that decide whether or not to harass them, whether or not to pollute their environment, whether or not to take their habitat. We're already responsible for that. So it's time we started taking that responsibility seriously. Okay. And finally, while I take questions, I just want to leave this up here. These are resources that you could go to if you want more information First, you could go to our website. So we have, if you want more information about conservation, we have information about conservation tips, how you can help, what sort of choices you can make, and threats to whales and dolphins. If you want to find out more about our research, you can go there as well and read about all our various research. Or you know what, even better, come and see us. We do all of our research in front of the public, and we love talking about it. So, come on down and talk to us about dolphins, about research, about conservation. And you can either have your families come down or have a school trip. Sorry, teachers, you may not have known that I was going to say that. But yes, we host school groups. We would love to have you come down. And if you can't make it down there live, we also do distance learning. So you could call us up or we can set something up that way as well. And of course, Dolphin Research Center, as wonderful as it is, and I do love it, is not the only game in the world. There are a lot of really good dolphin facilities. But to find a good one, I would suggest that you go to the Alliance of Marine Mammal Parks and Aquariums and look at their members. Now, we talked about accredited facilities just a minute ago, and for dolphins in particular, I would say that the Alliance of Marine Mammal Parks and Aquariums is probably the most important accrediting body. They have very high standards for membership for their animals. Okay, so let me scroll back. We have a few minutes for questions, and let me see what I can get to. I'm not going to get to all of them, but we'll get to some. Let's go backwards. How many babies do dolphins usually have? Usually, almost always, one at a time. And then beyond that, it depends. So they're going to have several years in between. And so it just depends really on how many, like I said, it's one at a time, and then you have several years in between. So depending on when they start breeding and depending on how long they last, it can be quite a different number. What is my degree? I have a PhD in cognitive science from MIT, and in cognitive science, that's how people, or actually it's the study of intelligence regardless of the medium in which it is in. So study intelligence in animals, in people, in machines, etc. So that's my degree. However, if just to broaden that a little bit, if the question is what sort of degree do you need to study dolphins, it depends on what you want to do. You probably need a PhD. If you want to do the research yourself, you need a PhD. So stay in school forever. Just kidding. Well, not really. But it could be in animal behavior. It could be in biology. It could be in psychology. It really just depends on what we want to focus on. Oh gosh, going backwards might not work because I'm going to get all of these. But let's see. Do different species of dolphins learn things faster than other species? That's different species of dolphins learn things faster than other species. What I can tell you is there are differences in how different species learn. That's definitely true. Within dolphins, we actually don't know a lot about the cognition of a bunch of different dolphin species. And the reason is we don't, the species that we have are mainly bottlenose dolphins when you're talking about dolphins per se. So when they're in the wild, we don't have the opportunity to do the kinds of tests in order to know. I would imagine there are differences, just like there are differences in different breeds of dogs and how quickly they learn in general. There are also differences, across animals, etc. All right, let me scroll back and try to get some of these other ones. And I apologize, we're not going to be able to get to everybody's, but I'll do the best I can. Let's see. Yeah. Do the dolphins seem to enjoy the testing process? Different dolphins have different dolphinalities or personalities, and some of them really seem to like research, and some of them not so much, which of course isn't really different than us, right? If you're talking about school, or if you're talking about sports, or if you're talking about anything, there are some kids, there are some people who really like one type of thing and really don't like another. But the cool thing is, the dolphins tell us. And just like with any of our sessions that we talked about, if a dolphin doesn't want to do that particular research session, they don't do it. They swim away. They say no. And we respect that choice, of course. And so the dolphins that end up doing the cognitive research are the ones that like it. Let's see. Do dolphins naturally like people, or are they afraid of us? You know, it's hard to say what we mean by naturally. First of all, dolphins are all different, just like people are all different, and they're going to have different experiences, and their experiences then are going to shape how they feel. So I can tell you that the dolphins at our facility, from the time they're babies, they're very, very interested in people. But of course, from the time they're babies, people have been, you know, giving them lots of positive attention and giving their moms lots of positive attention, and the moms like the people, etc. And so I think just like people, it would depend on what their experiences are. Do dolphins in marine mammal facilities have more or less intelligence than dolphins in the wild, or is there no difference? You know, this is from Kenyon W. That's a great question. That's impossible to answer. And the reason it's impossible to answer is you would need to have a test. Well, first of all, when you say more or less intelligence, like we talked about, I think you wrote that question before we got to that. When you say that, there is no one test for intelligence. But let's say we're talking about math ability, or let's say we're talking about memory, right? You'd have to have a way of testing both groups. And there's not a way of at least that we've come up with yet. There's always a possibility of come up with one, but where you can test both groups in the same way in order to answer that question. If you come up with one, send me an email because I'd love to know. Let's see. What diet do the dolphins have on when they're being trained? Our dolphins, and maybe if any of the DRC folks are here, they can help me out with this. They have a variety of different fish that they use, and it depends also throughout the year. So I know we feed them herring and smelt, and someone help me out. Someone type something. I don't know. I'm not actually in charge of that, but I do know there are a variety of different fish that we use, and it you know, it depends on their likes, and that's pretty much it. Did the ultrasound disturb the mom's echolocation? I'm assuming you mean when we had the dolphin laying out and we were doing ultrasound with them. At that point, the mom's not ultrasounding. I mean, sorry, the mom's not echolocating. Here's the thing about echolocation. It's not like sight in the sense that, you know, your sight is always on. You don't have to turn it on. You have to open your eyes. But once you open your eyes, it's just automatic. Echolocation doesn't work that way. Echolocation is not on all the time. This is something that they send out. They send out a signal, and they get it back. And so while the mom was lying there was no reason for her to echolocate. So it wasn't disturbing her echolocation because she wasn't doing it. Okay. I'm not sure I understand this question. The question is, what actions will be taken once the Marine Mammal Protection Act is implemented? The Marine Mammal Protection Act has been in place for a number of years now. It's already implemented. So if you want to clarify what you're asking, maybe I can give you a better question. I'm gonna how much do marine biologists make? I'm assuming you're talking about money here. Don't quit your day job is the best that I can tell you. And actually, let me answer that in a little bit more serious way. Anybody that works at a marine mammal facility is not making a lot of money. We don't do it for the money, and most of the people have second jobs as well. Now, I'm not a marine mammal biologist, but so let me answer for that too. The other places that one can work, the other places that a live scientist work is, of course, a university. And in a university, you're going to make more money, but it depends. It depends on the university, and there's a wide range, and so I don't really know the answer to that one. Let's see. More. We're almost at the end here. How many dolphins usually swim together? It depends. Very often you'll have certainly animals that swim. If they have a best buddy, they'll swim with them. In some of the bigger groups, you'll have, you know, more dolphins swimming together. The dolphins tend to swim together with the animals that they're most closely bonded with, just like you tend to hang out with the people that you're most closely bonded with. All right, almost out of time. My friends were helping me out with the question of the fish. Capelin, herring, based on the caloric content of each fish. So each dolphin has a set number of calories that it is supposed to get. You know, our bigger dolphins obviously are going to eat more than our baby dolphins, and so depending on what their particular diet calls for, they'll get a different variety of fish. And I think with that, we're out of time. Thank you guys for listening to me. I hope it was, you know, useful or helpful. And come see us. Thanks. Bye.